The city of Rome stood in eerie silence, its grand marble temples and ancient streets cloaked in fear. Smoke curled into the twilight sky, and the sound of distant thunder rolled across the horizon, not from storms, but from war drums. This was the moment when the Eternal City, once the unchallenged heart of the world, faced the unthinkable, its own destruction. Yet to understand how the mightiest empire in human history came to this precipice, we must step back into a century of decline, betrayal, and slow decay. The year was 410 AD, but the fall had begun long before the first barbarian sword struck its gates. For nearly 5 centuries, Rome had been the supreme power of the known world. Its legions conquered from the Scottish highlands to the sands of Arabia, and its roads and laws bound together a realm of unimaginable size. But by the 5th century, this grandeur was an illusion, a hollow shell of marble over crumbling foundations. The Western Roman Empire was dying, bled dry by civil wars, corruption, and endless invasions. Its people still believed in the idea of Rome, Roma Aeterna, the city eternal, but reality told another story. The empire's borders had retreated, its treasury was empty, and its armies were no longer truly Roman. The death blow came not from foreign conquest alone but from within. The emperors of this late age were often puppets, raised and deposed by powerful generals or court factions. The once disciplined Roman army had become a patchwork of mercenaries, Germanic federati soldiers who fought for pay and promises rather than loyalty to the empire. When gold ran short, so too did allegiance. The Roman heartlands, once secure, now trembled with rebellion, famine, and plague. The Senate, once the engine of governance, was little more than a ceremonial relic, clinging to traditions that no longer held power. Meanwhile, a new force was rising beyond the Alps and the Danube, tribes long branded as barbarians but now hardened by centuries of contact with Rome. Chief among them were the Visigoths, a people who had once fled into Roman lands seeking refuge from the Huns. They had been promised protection, but betrayal and starvation turned them into Rome's bitterest enemies. Their leader, a formidable warrior named Alaric, had served Rome faithfully as a general before being cast aside by jealous commanders. To him, the empire's arrogance was not only political but moral. He had learned Rome's ways, mastered its tactics, and now turned them against his former masters. Across the empire, ordinary citizens clung to the old idea of Roman invincibility. To them, Rome was not just a city, it was the world itself. The idea that it could ever fall was inconceivable. Yet whispers had begun to spread through markets and temples. Merchants spoke of barbarian armies massing near the frontiers. Priests muttered that the gods had abandoned their temples. Even Christian bishops, now powerful in this era of faith and fear, warned that divine punishment awaited a people corrupted by excess and sin. The air was thick with foreboding. In 402 AD, Emperor Honorius, timid, indecisive, and easily swayed, moved the imperial court from Rome to Ravenna, a city better defended by swamps and fortifications. His retreat was symbolic. For the first time in history, an emperor abandoned the eternal city. Rome, the ancient heart of empire, was left to fend for itself. To many, this was the moment the empire truly began to die. Without the emperor's presence, Rome's authority was little more than memory. The Senate still met, but its words no longer carried weight. The people of Rome began to look not to their rulers, but to their faith and to their own survival. Outside its walls, the world shifted. The great power that once ruled from the Atlantic to the Euphrates was now split into 2 halves, the wealthy Eastern Empire centered in Constantinople, and the struggling Western half gasping for life. Constantinople, under its capable emperors, still glittered with prosperity. But the West was drowning. Armies defected, cities were lost, and the once mighty legions became ghosts of their former selves. And yet, through all this chaos, Rome endured, a living symbol of what once was. Its people believed the city could not fall because it had never fallen. That illusion, however, was about to shatter. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change history forever. The Visigoths, driven by hunger, betrayal, and ambition, turned their gaze toward the heart of the empire. Rome, vulnerable and alone, would soon face its reckoning. The empire's might had withered, but its pride remained unbroken, a dangerous combination in an age of desperation. As the sun sank over the 7 hills, the shadows of the past lengthened. The glory of Augustus, the conquests of Caesar, the triumphs of the legions, all seemed like faded dreams compared to the grim reality now unfolding. Somewhere beyond the city walls, campfires burned in the distance, and the sound of horns carried through the night. The people of Rome prayed, but many sensed what was coming. The eternal city, for all its walls and wonders, stood on the edge of oblivion. And so began the day when Rome almost ceased to exist, a moment when the empire's centuries of triumph met their tragic reckoning, and the world's greatest civilization trembled before the storm it had long denied. The story continues eastward, carried by wind, ambition, and the restless curiosity that defined the Norse spirit. By the late 9th century, the Viking world had stretched far beyond the cold waters of Scandinavia. Their longships, symbols of exploration and conquest, were no longer just instruments of raid, they were bridges between civilizations. The Norse had become traders as much as warriors, and in their wake, they left trails of silver, silk, and story. What began as scattered raids on the coasts of Britain and Francia had evolved into a sophisticated network of trade and diplomacy that reached deep into the heart of Eurasia. Through these networks, whispers began to spread, whispers of lands far beyond even the golden domes of Constantinople. Lands where the sun rose earlier, the people were small and disciplined, and their swords curved like the crescent moon. The route eastward began through the rivers of the Rus. From the Baltic Sea, Viking merchants sailed their shallow-draft ships into the Neva River and onward to the Great Lakes of Ladoga and Ilmen, entering the vast arteries of Eastern Europe. The Dnieper and the Volga carried them southward, connecting them to the Black and Caspian Seas. By the early 10th century, these Norsemen, now called the Varangians, had carved out kingdoms and trade outposts, the most famous being the city of Kiev. Here, under leaders like Rurik and Oleg, the Rus became intermediaries between the northern world of the Vikings and the southern world of Byzantium and Islam. They traded furs, honey, slaves, and amber for silver dirhams, spices, and silk. Over 100,000 Arabic coins have been discovered in Scandinavian soil, silent witnesses to the eastward pull that shaped the Viking Age. As these connections deepened, so too did the Vikings' horizons. They learned from every people they encountered: Greek navigation, Arabic mathematics, Persian astronomy. Some Varangian mercenaries in Constantinople spoke of caravans that stretched beyond Persia, across deserts to lands ruled by emperors more powerful than the caliph himself. The Byzantines called it Ceres, the land of silk. The Vikings, through translation and imagination, came to call it the Sunrise Kingdom. To the pragmatic Norse mind, this was not a myth, it was a destination waiting to be reached. Among these eastern-bound adventurers, stories tell of a chieftain named Eirikr the Far-Traveled, a man of no fixed home and no fixed god. His name is half history, half legend, drawn from fragments of Norse sagas that mention explorers who sailed beyond the lands of the Rus and vanished where the rivers end. Eirikr was said to have joined a Rus trade expedition bound for the Caspian Sea around the year 950. The journey was perilous. Bandits, shifting alliances, and the constant threat of betrayal haunted their route. Yet Eirikr and his crew pressed on, lured by tales of silk cities and spices that could buy kingdoms. Their voyage carried them through the Caspian, where they traded with Persian merchants under the watchful eye of the Samanid dynasty. There, Eirikr supposedly heard from Arab traders about another sea beyond the world, a great eastern ocean that bordered lands rich in gold and strange customs. Some called it the Sea of Sunrise. Perhaps it was exaggeration, or perhaps it sparked something reckless in him. Against the advice of wiser men, Eirikr sold his share of the cargo and gathered a crew of 20 to push further east. They traveled by caravan across Central Asia, a land of endless sky and wind, where steppe tribes, perhaps early Turks or Mongolic peoples, regarded them with suspicion and wonder. Weeks became months. By the time they reached the eastern edge of Asia, they had passed through deserts that swallowed men whole and mountains crowned with snow. The Vikings were now far from the sea that had once been their home. But Eirikr was driven by obsession, a need to find the edge of the map and prove that no horizon could bind the Norse spirit. Somewhere near the coast of what might have been China or Korea, they constructed a crude vessel with local help, guided by seafarers who spoke strange tongues. Their knowledge of shipbuilding and navigation allowed them to brave the waters of the Pacific, though to them it was a nameless void. The journey that followed defied reason. The Pacific was unlike any sea they had ever known, vast, unpredictable, and filled with storms that seemed to tear at the sky itself. The monsoon season descended like the wrath of gods unfamiliar to them. The small ship, built for coastal travel, was tossed and shattered by waves taller than any mast. Supplies dwindled, and death crept closer each day. Men muttered prayers to Odin, to Christ, to anyone who might listen. Yet even in despair, Eiríkur held fast to the tiller, his eyes fixed on the horizon where dawn still burned. Days turned into delirium. Salt waters scoured their throats. The wind howled through the remnants of their sail. When the storm finally broke, silence reigned, a silence so complete that it felt sacred. The survivors, barely a dozen, found themselves adrift near strange islands fringed with emerald forests. The air was thick with warmth, and the scent of unknown blossoms filled their lungs. Birds screamed overhead, and mountains rose in the distance, sharp and perfect like blades drawn from the sea. They had no name for this place. But in their exhaustion and awe, one of the crew whispered, "We have found the edge of the world." They had, though they did not yet know it, reached the shores of Japan. In that moment, myth and history blurred. The Vikings, children of Odin and masters of the western seas, had come face to face with the mysterious East. It was not a planned conquest, not a calculated journey. It was an accident of fate, born from curiosity and hubris. But as their longboat's shattered hull scraped against the sand, they stepped onto a land that would change everything they believed about the limits of their world. Back in the West, no chronicler would ever record their journey. The sagas would speak vaguely of Eiríkur the far-traveled, who sailed where the sun was born and never returned. Yet the possibility lingers in the spaces between history's pages, a forgotten voyage that connected two warrior worlds before the world itself was ready. And so, in the midst of that unknown shore, drenched in salt and silence, began the impossible meeting that time itself almost erased. Weeks passed as the stranded Vikings repaired what remained of their ship, unaware that their presence had already drawn the attention of a local daimyo. To him, the sight of foreign warriors on his shores was both threat and omen. Rumors spread through nearby villages of red-haired giants who wielded thunder and carried axes that could cleave helmets in two. In a land bound by honor and order, such chaos could not be tolerated. A message was sent to a nearby garrison. Soon, a detachment of samurai was dispatched to investigate, armored, disciplined, and led by a veteran commander named Takeda Masanobu. He was no stranger to conflict but wary of unnecessary bloodshed. Yet when his scouts reported that the strangers had built fortifications and armed themselves, he knew diplomacy would be short-lived. "If they come in peace," he told his men, "we will show restraint. If they come for war, we will end it swiftly." On the Viking side, Eiríkur saw the same storm rising. His men, starving and exhausted, refused to surrender their weapons. "We are not beggars," he growled, "we are warriors." That pride would seal their fate. When the samurai emissaries approached the camp, the meeting was tense, 2 languages, 2 codes, and no bridge between them. Misunderstanding bred fear. Fear gave birth to violence. An arrow flew, no one would later remember who fired first, and the fragile peace shattered. The Vikings roared to arms, forming a shield wall, while the samurai advanced in perfect formation, their armor glinting beneath gathering thunderclouds. The storm broke as steel met steel, and the rain began to fall. The stage was set. Nature, fate, and human pride had conspired to bring 2 warrior worlds to the edge of destruction. The assault began before dawn. Alaric's men poured through the Solarian gate, opened from within by slaves or sympathizers, no one truly knew. In moments, centuries of Roman supremacy collapsed into chaos. Torches set the night ablaze as Gothic war cries echoed through marble streets that had once hosted triumphs. The Visigoths moved methodically, plundering treasuries, seizing food, and dragging nobles from their homes. For 3 days, the eternal city trembled beneath barbarian boots. Yet this was no senseless slaughter. Alaric forbade the burning of churches, declaring them sanctuaries. The Christian basilicas, once symbols of the new faith, now shielded tens of thousands from death. In the shadows of St. Peter's, senators and beggars prayed side by side, hearing the city's lament beyond the walls. Wealth, not vengeance, drove the sack. Rome's glory melted into gold coins and captured relics. When it ended, silence reigned where empires once roared. Smoke rose from ruined temples, and the Tiber carried away debris of empire. Alaric, gazing upon the shattered heart of the ancient world, ordered his army to withdraw. He had not meant to destroy Rome entirely, only to show the world that the impossible could happen. The eternal city, unconquered for 8 centuries, had fallen. The myth was broken. The world would never be the same. When the Visigoths marched away, they left behind a city hollowed by loss. Survivors wandered through streets of ash and rubble, unable to comprehend what had happened. The Senate's authority vanished, and the Emperor Honorius, safe in Ravenna, seemed powerless, irrelevant, even absurd. Chroniclers wrote that when news reached him, he wept not for Rome, but for his favorite pet chicken named Roma. The story, perhaps apocryphal, perfectly captured the empire's decay. An emperor detached from reality while his world burned. Rome's psychological collapse was deeper than its physical ruin. For generations, Romans had believed themselves favored by destiny, protected by gods, or now by God. If Rome could fall, what else was certain? The shock reverberated through the empire, shattering confidence in its leadership and its purpose. Pagan philosophers declared it punishment for abandoning the old gods. Christians saw it as divine testing. Famine followed, then plague. The Tiber's banks filled with bodies, unburied and forgotten. The once great city became a ghost of itself, its people whispering of omens and the end of the world. For centuries, Romans had called their city Urbs Aeterna, the eternal city. Now, eternity looked fragile, fleeting, mortal. The sack of Rome was more than a military defeat. It was a spiritual collapse, the moment the ancient world realized it could die. In the aftermath, the world sought meaning amid ruin. Rome's ashes became symbols of both loss and renewal. In North Africa, St. Augustine began writing The City of God, arguing that no earthly empire, however glorious, could last. His words reframed the fall not as divine punishment but as transformation, an end that birthed a new Christian world. Meanwhile, the Visigoths moved south, Alaric dying shortly after the sack. Legend claimed he was buried beneath a river, surrounded by Roman gold, his grave concealed forever. The man who humbled Rome vanished into myth, leaving behind an empire staggering toward oblivion. Yet Rome did not die completely. Its language endured, its laws shaped new kingdoms, and its ruins inspired awe across centuries. Even the conquerors adopted Roman customs, building their legitimacy upon the legacy they had once destroyed. The sack of 410 AD marked not just the fall of a city, but the end of an age. The classical world gave way to the medieval, and from the wreckage rose new powers and faiths that would define the next millennium. Rome's fall became history's greatest warning, and its greatest inheritance. Empires fall, but ideas endure. Rome, even in ruin, refused to vanish. Its shadow stretched across every future empire that dared to dream of eternity.